What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Thursday, September 5th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 5-game MLB slate tonight, smaller prize pools than usual because, of course, the NFL season does kick off tonight. Huge prize pools over there in the Ravens and Chiefs showdown game. So good luck with that if you are going to play. I'm not going to touch on it much other than quickly at some point during the show showing my showdown data and tool that I have built that you can subscribe to if you're interested. But going to be a baseball show. I haven't built NFL lineups yet, so sorry in advance to the at least one person that asks me what they should play in showdown. I don't know, outside of having a couple of ideas, but haven't built anything really for that yet. Still some money to be made in MLB. Maybe some players will be taking the night off. Maybe fields will be a little bit softer. Somebody mentioned overlay. I hadn't actually looked lately, but that is certainly possible too. Although they did make tournaments much smaller than usual. Either way, still money to be made over there. 5-gamer, doesn't look like we have any weather concerns, so that's nice. And as always, going to go through what my lineups would be looking like right now. One caveat, I did screw up something in the settings when I was building my lineups, so didn't end up with the exact process that I typically use, but it seems like it's close enough. My exposures don't look too weird for the most part. So I think it's still probably pretty representative of what I'd be playing. And if I do see anything that I think is crazy or I don't agree with or I'm not going to play, then I will be sure to point it out. But I think everything looks pretty good for right now. 5-game slate. So again, you can kind of justify going most different directions as well. On slates of this size, targeting negative correlation does typically become a little bit stronger strategy because the margin to kind of get middled, for lack of a better word, is smaller. On your larger slates, when you're stacking against popular pitchers, you're still opening yourself up to, even if your stack does well enough to make that pitcher not be that good, you're not necessarily scoring enough fantasy points to take down a tournament because of the opportunity cost. On a 5-game slate, that's less the case. You're just more likely, if your team does well at all, they're just pretty likely to be a tournament winning team because there's only 10 offenses playing and most offenses aren't going to do well because hitting is really hard. So that does become a little bit stronger strategy on slates of this size. And I do think that's going to come into play here just based on how much of the Angels it looks like I'm getting to. Also, before we get into it, congrats, Jonathan Clark. I mentioned at the beginning that he 20x'd yesterday. That's awesome. Glad to hear that. I certainly did not, so I'm glad that somebody else did. That is a solid return. I'm sure that felt good. Congrats on that. So starting with the pitching here, Reynaldo Lopez leading the way, and this has been the trend ever since Colorado got into Atlanta. It was really difficult to get away from Sale a couple of days ago. It was really difficult to get away from Morton yesterday. And it's going to be really difficult to get away from Lopez today, even at a $9,900 price tag, projected for almost 60% ownership here. I mean, you can obviously make the case that Reynaldo Lopez is really expensive and over half the field's probably going to play him, but he has a 25% strikeout percentage, which is the highest of anyone pitching tonight. If you look at the Fangraphs leaderboard for starting pitchers today and sort by strikeout percentage, everybody ahead of Reynaldo Lopez was on the afternoon slate. So that makes him, obviously look better. 25.5% strikeout percentage, 3.72 xFIP. And then the thing that is clearly driving most of the ownership is that you have the Rockies outside of Coors Field. This is a team that overall this season ranks 28th in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching. They rank 28th in WRC plus. They rank 3rd in strikeout percentage. WRC plus is park adjusted, so you're basically just double counting by saying that they're outside of Coors, but strikeout percentage is not. And keep in mind that not only is Coors Field just really good for offense in general, it's difficult to get strikeouts there. It's difficult to strike out there. And the Rockies still managed to have one of the highest strikeout percentages in baseball, despite playing half of their games there. So just unbelievably good spot for Lopez. The larger the tournament you're playing, I think the more you can justify not playing him just because of raw ownership. But the kind of counterpoint to that is because there's NFL tonight and tournaments are smaller, it's not like we have any 25,000 entry GPPs to play. I don't really see anything on DraftKings that I would be going out of my way to avoid Reynaldo Lopez. The big $15 only has 7,800 entries in it. That's obviously a large field tournament, but not to the extent where I would be trying to just start running away from the best plays because of ownership. So really, really tough to not get to Lopez here. Cody Bradford, it looks like for me, is very much I'm taking both sides of this one spot. This is a park that's very good for home runs. It's also a good matchup for Bradford against an Angels lineup that is pretty weak. We do generally prefer them against right-handed pitching. They do actually rank 10th in WRC plus against left-handed pitching this year, but and 15th in strikeout percentage. So you do prefer them against righties, but Bradford is solid. He has a 24% strikeout percentage this year, only walking about 3% of hitters, 3.86 xFIP. That's the third highest strikeout percentage on the slate behind Lopez and Suarez. He's very reasonably priced at 7,900 also. So I think that helps to mitigate whatever concerns you have about the Angels and their splits against lefties. So I'm getting to a lot of him. So is the field, pretty much even. Field's at 42%. I'm at about 45. And as I mentioned earlier, and you could see it on the screen when I started the show, I am getting to the Angels pretty aggressively against him as well. If you're playing one lineup, I don't really think there's a right answer. If you want to go Lopez, Bradford in your one lineup, that's fine. If you want to go Lopez and stack the Angels, I think that is also fine because, again, you do have very significant negative correlation here. And when you talk about the two most popular pitchers on the slate, yeah, Lopez is getting more than Bradford, but I would certainly prefer getting the Angels in Texas than the Rockies basically anywhere ever. And Lopez is, I think, a better pitcher than Bradford also. So that's why the Angels are going to pop up a little bit more. Ranger Suarez, 9,700. Decent matchup against Miami. Not a good offense at all. They rank 8th in strikeout percentage as well, 24% K percentage against left-handed pitching, 87 WRC plus. So that strikeout percentage has actually come up a bit as the year has gone on, and they made some trades. So that sets up nicely for Suarez. He is second in strikeout percentage, as I mentioned, at 24.7%. 3.09 xFIP is better than any pitcher on this slate or pitching today, period. So that looks good. He gets the park upgrade pitching in Miami as well, getting to about 23% of him. Fields at 37%. I think the exposure that I'm getting to him is basically a function of what I'm doing with Ronaldo Lopez. It's relatively difficult to get Lopez plus Suarez together. Like, you can still do it, but you're spending, 19K, give or take, at pitcher and foregoing Bradford. So I would expect that if you're somebody that's going to play like 75% Lopez, then you probably end up getting like 20% more Suarez than I have. Like, if I were to cap Lopez here at 75%, I would guess it pretty much just transitions straight to Suarez, and Suarez ends up at like 40 to 45. But because I'm jamming in Lopez, it is costing me a little bit of Suarez, which I'm okay with. Like, I'd be fine with it either direction. I think Suarez is a good pitcher. I think it's a good matchup and all of that. But I'm certainly not going to be upset that I'm playing nearly 100% Lopez. I wouldn't be upset if I was a little bit flatter and just slightly over the field on both of them. I don't really care one way or the other. I'm perfectly fine with the way that it is showing up. If you look at my projections, the data that I'm using, that's something to keep in mind that I don't always touch on enough, because I don't want to do an entire show where I'm just like, I have this guy projected for 21.3 points. But the thing to keep in mind is that any Sims tool or optimizer or whatever it is that you're using, all it's doing is what you tell it to do with the inputs that you give it. So it's not like, I'm not saying just blindly, I'm playing, Ronaldo Lopez is way better than Ranger Suarez. I'm going to play close to 100% Lopez. But if you do agree with my inputs, with my assumptions, where Lopez is projected like 4.5 points better than Suarez, this is exactly what I would want, is a little bit of a haircut on Suarez and just getting a bunch more Lopez. If you're higher on Suarez and or lower on Lopez, and you were to put in something like, a 19-point projection on Lopez and an 18-point projection on Suarez, then you're going to get back probably closer to that, like 65, 70% Lopez and then, 40% Suarez split. So a lot of it really is just going to come down to exactly where you're at on these guys. But given the, difference that I have on them in projection, I would expect and want to be getting Lopez the way that I am. It's not costing me all of my Suarez, but there is a big enough gap there that I'm not overly surprised. Suarez threw 78 pitches last time out, 72 the start before that. So I don't have huge pitch count concerns on him, but a little bit. Those were, 2 starts back from the injured list. I assume you're getting like 85, 90 pitches from him here, but obviously that's not guaranteed. Whereas with Lopez, his last 3 starts, 90, 94, and 96 pitches since returning from the injured list. So that is one thing that is pointing to Lopez, and it is, I think, why my projection on Lopez is a bit higher, is just the ability to project him to go a little bit deeper into this game, not having any sort of pitch count concerns whatsoever. Martin Perez showing up about 17% for me, about even with the field. 7K price tag, decent spot against the Tigers. Detroit ranks 11th in strikeout percentage against left-handed pitching. They have been above average. 106 WRC plus, ranks 14th or tied for 13th. Perez, not a great strikeout pitcher either, but 18% K percentage isn't terrible on this slate. 4.5 xFIP isn't good, but it's not terrible on this slate. Not somebody I'd want to be going crazy on, but 17% for me, 21 for the field. That's fine with me. Jake Irvin in a good spot here, getting 14% ownership. I'm at about 11. The price tag's a little elevated at 8,600. He is having a decent season, 20.5% K percentage, 4 flat xFIP, has a pretty good matchup against the Pirates, who rank 8th in K percentage and 25th in WRC plus against right-handed pitching. I think it's really just that Irvin is kind of at an awkward price point where in a lot of lineups, it's not going to be that difficult to adjust your stack a little bit and just get to either Suarez or Lopez, or just save money and get to Bradford, who projects better. But still, from a range of outcome standpoint, even though the median projection isn't great on Irvin, it is still a good spot. He is absolutely capable of just going out and giving you a good game. So, getting in there around 10, 15% of the time makes sense to me. That's where the field's at as well. Bailey Falter, Austin Gomber, Adam Oller, Casey Mize. These guys are just kind of in a handful of lineups here and there, both for me and the field. They're cheap, but, Falter, not a good strikeout pitcher, not in a good strikeout spot. Gomber, not a good pitcher, not in a good spot. Although, he is outside of Coors, so he does have that working for him. But, and he's probably not as terrible a pitcher as, people maybe give him credit for, but certainly not good. Adam Oller, again, not particularly good and in a very tough spot. Casey Mize, not a good strikeout pitcher and in a horrible strikeout spot. So there's nothing down here that I'm, upset about not getting to. Before we move over to top stacks, Choke Hold'em said, I'm tapping out for the season, but wanted to say thank you for everything you do for us. Thanks for watching the show. And if you hadn't heard it, I will be doing NFL shows on Sunday morning, either 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. Eastern. So if you're playing NFL and interested in that, I will have some content out there if you want to check it out. But either way, thanks for checking out the MLB stuff this year. Not going to comment on what Kurt said, but I agree. So caught up on chat for right now. Looking at the stacks that I'm getting to, Angels, like I mentioned before, at the top in basically half of my lineups when you look at all stack types, not, all 5-mans, but in a nice chunk of lineups as 5-mans as well. But it's really across this set of lineups very aggressively getting to either Bradford or the Angels. And it just makes sense because of the upside in this game. When you think about it from a range of outcome standpoint, they both are going to project pretty well from a value standpoint. The Angels are not an expensive offense to get to, and Bradford's not an expensive pitcher, but Bradford's one of the better strikeout pitchers on the slate. And the Angels do have some power upside, especially in this park. So it's just one of those games that when you look at the matchup, you look at the pricing between both sides, it's really hard to picture that middle ground where on a 5-game slate, Bradford isn't good for $7,900, but on that same 5-game slate, no part of the Angels are good for their prices, especially in a park, again, that does play up home runs. So, that's why I think prioritizing getting to the Angels in non-Bradford lineups makes sense. Like when you compare that to Atlanta and Colorado, not only does Colorado suck, which isn't even the point that I'm trying to make here, but 9,900 for Reynaldo Lopez, there's just a bigger middle ground where Lopez, doesn't beat Suarez and maybe doesn't even beat Bradford, but the Rockies don't really do all that much either. They just do enough that the most expensive pitcher on the slate isn't one of the highest scorers. And that's, not going to take that much. Whereas for a $7,900 pitcher on a slate that has Mize and Oller and Falter and these other shitty pitchers that I mentioned, if Bradford isn't one of the best scoring mid-range pitchers, there had to have been runs scored against him or he got hurt. And, assuming that it's the former, you just have to kind of have value from the Angels in that case. So that's why the game is breaking down the way it is, where I'm aggressively getting to both sides. Getting to Texas on the other side of it, this park, again, one that I really like getting to. Jack Kohanowitz is on the mound for the Angels. I think this is one of the worst pitchers that has ever pitched. Really, really bad at getting strikeouts. He theoretically can keep the ball on the ground, going back to his time in the minors. So far in a limited sample in the majors, 190 expected ISO to righties, 172 to lefties. Lefties striking out 6% of the time, righties striking out 12% of the time. The Rangers look really, really good. Philadelphia going up against Aller. You get a park downgrade in Miami, but you still have a high upside offense. Didn't actually check this lineup, but I'm pulling it up now. Bryce Harper is in it. I don't know what to do with him because he's hurt, I'm pretty sure. Had a Philly stack the other day doing well, and so I happened to be, watching the end of the game in time to see him basically unable to swing a bat. Like, he would swing and then drop the bat from being in pain. So I think he's just playing through something that is affecting his power. That's not to say that, like, you can't play Bryce Harper or that I'm just Xing out Bryce Harper, but I do think if you wanted to do something to, downgrade his projection at least a little bit, it's probably not the worst idea in the world. I think it's more likely that he's hurt right now than that he's fully healthy. And again, he's still Bryce Harper. He can play at 80% and be better than most hitters. So I don't want to just remove him, but maybe not projecting him exactly like he's Bryce Harper against Adam Oller is not a bad approach either. That being said, though, Philadelphia, top to bottom, a high upside offense. Schwarber, Turner, Castellanos, Stott, Realmuto, Marsh. These guys all can do damage. And Oller is not a particularly good pitcher, despite having a really good start or two recently. Very, very small sample so far this year. Small sample pretty much, period. But if you go back to 2022, 892 pitches thrown to lefties, 270 expected ISO, 1,089 pitches thrown to righties, 191 expected ISO. Just not a particularly good pitcher and in a tough spot. So Philly obviously looks good. Atlanta going up against Gomber looks good. Washington against Falter. Falter is one of these pitchers that when he's on, he's really frustrating to stack against because he has good command and can get infield fly balls. And you're basically watching this guy pitch and thinking, I could go out there and hit against him. He pitches like he's in high school, but when he's locating, he just manages to get weak contact and outs, but he does have a small margin for error because his stuff isn't particularly good. 198 expected ISO allowed to right-handed hitters this season. So there is power upside here for guys in the Nats lineup. Also, they're not particularly expensive. Juan Yepez hitting third at 3,500. Dylan Cruz, obviously, in this lineup leading off. James Wood, lefty, you can absolutely go to. Chaparro is batting cleanup at 2,900. So really inexpensive stack. If you were going to go like Suarez plus Lopez, I would think that Washington's a team that probably shows up quite a bit in those builds. So that's, one of those teams you can get to. Pittsburgh going up against Irvin. He has had some power issues this year. 1.45 home runs allowed per 9 innings for Irvin, even though he's been okay overall. Lefties have been the big issue for him. 222 expected ISO, only a 19% strikeout percentage in that split. Left-handed home run park factor in PNC has actually been pretty high this year as well, if I remember correctly. I think I saw that the other day, and I'm going back to double check it now. But something that, I think is at least worth mentioning. PNC ranks 7th in home run park factor for left-handed hitters this season. Over the last 3 seasons, it ranks actually higher than I was thinking off the top of my head. It ranks 10th. So 104 park factor for lefties, home run park factor for lefties in PNC since the start of the 2022 season. So that does set up pretty nicely against a pitcher in Irvin that struggles with left-handed power. Brian Reynolds, O'Neill Cruz, both look good. They are expensive, though. Rowdy Tellez, 3,200 from the left side, does carry pinch hit risk, but Connor Joe is starting, so that should lower the pinch hit risk a little bit. I'm going to pull up Pittsburgh's roster now just to see who else they have. I'm sure they have other right-handed hitters, but Connor Joe is normally the guy that you're concerned about when Rowdy Tellez gets the start, and Joe is also starting, so there is going to be a bit less. You do not have McCutchen in the lineup. I'm not positive if he's active. He's day to day, so I think there's a good chance since he's not starting that he's just not playing. So if we assume that McCutchen is just not available, then I think you're looking at like De La Cruz as like a potential pinch hit guy. Yeah, like he's not in the lineup. He's right-handed, but point being that at the very least, the pinch hit risk is lower for Tellez because of Joe being in the lineup. Grandal from the left side, cheap catching option as well. So there are some left-handed bats to get to for Pittsburgh going up against Irvin, who has struggled with that split. Washington, their bullpen does have 3 lefties in it. One of them probably is not available because he pitched yesterday and the day before, but you do probably have 2 left-handed relievers, so they can match up later on in the game. But also keep in mind that Brian Reynolds and Yasmani Grandal are both switch hitters as well, so can't match up with them. And then just rounding things out with Detroit, similarly rostered to Washington and Pittsburgh. San Diego, same ballpark. Casey Mize, when he's on, can get some ground balls and limit damage. Not a good strikeout pitcher. Probably not somebody you would take first overall if the Tigers could go back and do it again, but does generally do an okay job at limiting power. 134 expected ISO to righties, 150 to lefties since last year. Same range if you go back to 2022. Same range basically if you go back to 2021, with the exception of he used to give up a ton of power to lefties, but he hasn't recently. So not a great spot for San Diego's home run upside outside of just like them being good at hitting. So I think if you're going to them, you're pretty much just banking on their talent, or maybe just, getting into the Tigers bullpen and having some success there. And then finally, just not really getting to Miami or Colorado. If you're getting to them, it is solely because Suarez is going to be popular and Lopez is going to be popular, but pretty clearly the lowest priority stacks on the slate, lowest chances of success. I've said it already, and it's very, very clear in my player exposures. You basically have 3 popular pitchers on this slate, and if I'm stacking against one of them, for me, it's Bradford over Lopez, over Suarez. Before we get into individual hitters, spurious news with a solid segue for me there. He said baseball's still happening today. Yes, it is, but also obviously showdown tonight. And I have put together some NFL stuff. I am doing NFL content this year. You can sign up for it using pretty much any of the links in the description below. If you sign up for Endgame Syndicate, it is included there at the regular monthly price. If you sign up for the NFL Dub Club link in the description, it comes with all of that content. So if you are someone that doesn't play enough volume that Endgame makes sense, and you want to work your way up, I think it's a really good product for you to check out. I'll have my main slate data, my showdown data, projections, stuff that I simulate, seeing how different roster constructions come together. You can filter by captain. If you want Patrick Mahomes a captain, you can see who is optimal with him the most often. You can see how they compare to their baseline optimal percentages. So that's telling you who really correlates with him well and who's getting pulled up by him. Stuff like that. If you're hand building, playing smaller field lineups at a cost efficient price, that makes it so you should actually be able to profit at DFS and still pay for a subscription. So check that out if you are looking for showdown content. I do have my stuff up for tonight. I was trying to pull it up and show it on screen, but I can't move that quickly. I'm running on like 2 hours of sleep because of working on that. But anyway, check it out. Sign up using the link in the description below. There is a 7-day free trial for that as well, for the Dub Club aspect. So if you're looking for it for tonight, just want to check it out, whatever, sign up, get Discord access. Also can talk to me in there. Now moving back to position by position, starting with the catchers. JT Realmuto showing up the most for me, pretty much in line with the field. Good spot against Dollar. Like I said, gives up power to both sides historically. We know Realmuto has it. He's pretty inexpensive as well. Sean Murphy, righty-lefty matchup against Austin Gomber is nice. He's also got a little bit of a lineup bump, hitting 6th at 3,900. Jonah Heim hitting 7th, 3,500, going up against Kahanowitz. Again, love that matchup, especially in that park. Jake Rogers, Carson Kelly showing up a little bit as well. Ownership pretty flat at catcher, with the exception of Realmuto and Murphy, and I do think they are the 2 top catchers as well. I'm a little bit below the field, but nothing too crazy. Do I have a team you'd rather play in single entry than MME? Not really. It generally carries over pretty closely for me. There will be some exceptions, like yesterday in uh, high stakes 3 max, I had a 5-man Dodger stack, whereas in large field, I was pretty heavily on like 2-man Dodger stacks. But for the most part, it carries over. Like none of the teams today strike me as one that I definitely wouldn't play in single entry. The Angels are probably like the riskiest because they do have a lower implied run total, but then the counterpoint is that Bradford might be even more popular in those contests, so your negative correlation is stronger. I do think the upside for the Angels is enough that I'd at least consider them, but I would expect that I'm on either the Angels, Texas, or Philly in single entry most likely. Definitely don't look at any of those teams and say, oh, this is exclusively MME. Kind of like I was saying at the top with Bradford. I think you can make a very good lineup with Bradford for single entry. I think you can make a good Angel stack for single entry. So I wouldn't shy away from any of those teams specifically. Give us an NFL take for tonight's game. My brain is fried. I can barely remember like who's playing if it's not in front of me. I do have I have Pacheco as the most underowned captain on DraftKings and just underowned in general. So there's that. At least as of when I last ran this stuff like this afternoon. But I actually had Pacheco followed by Mahomes as the most underowned captains. Mahomes obviously still going to be extremely popular, but Pacheco not projected for a ton of ownership at captain, like 15%. And I think that's actually low. So I guess that's an NFL take. Moving over to first base, Torkelson, not exciting, but only getting 8% ownership, going up against Perez. So we do have a left-handed pitcher against him who doesn't miss a lot of bats. Need to scroll back and make sure he's in the lineup. Yeah, Power put the lineup out there. Torkelson hitting 6th. So Torkelson, at 4K, just gives you some power upside against Perez. Not a horrible pitcher, but obviously not a great pitcher either so far this season. Right-handed hitters have a 221 expected ISO against him, 18.5% strikeout percentage. And also keep in mind, for whatever it's worth, San Diego Petco Park is playing extremely well for right-handed power this year. Again, remains to be seen if that holds or not, like year over year. But it has been the case for this season, and Torkelson is pretty low owned. So I do like that. Bryce Harper, I'm getting the 15%, Fields at 24. This is without me doing anything to this projection either, because I had just completely forgotten about it until I did the show and mentioned it. So probably for me, don't even necessarily need to do anything to his projection because I'm already under the field. But that's even kind of more reason to, I think, err on the side of thinking that he's banged up and it could affect him, because the benefit, if he is just pretty great when he's 24% owned. If he were like 5% owned or 3% owned, then you're more inclined to just say, all right, well, hopefully Bryce Harper feels really good today and just breaks out of it. But if a quarter of the field's going to just ignore what seems like a pretty obvious injury situation, then I don't mind being below it and kind of taking a stand that way. So again, it's Bryce Harper. I'm not upset about playing him, but I do think that there is potential, slight edge for knocking down his projection a little bit. Nolan Schanuel not getting any ownership here. Lefty, but 3,300 batting third. If you're going to him, it's probably more so in stacks. I don't think I'm going to be doing a whole lot of like singling out the left-handed hitter against Bradford, but it is worth mentioning that Bradford, very small sample this year, but actually only has a 17.5% K percentage against lefties compared to 26% against righties. And he's allowed a 210 expected ISO against them. If you go back to last year, still a small sample, but a little bit bigger, 15% K percentage against lefties, 25% against righties. But then the bigger point, and why the point that I was going to make about stacking, is that if you're stacking the Angels, obviously you're hoping they just throw a bunch of runs up on Bradford. And once Bradford leaves the game, you're probably going to have the platoon advantage in most future at-bats for Schanuel. So that is something that can work in his favor if things go your way. And he probably just should be more than 2% owned. Even if you call this like 5%, I think that at 3,300 in that park, he probably should be a little bit more popular on a 5-game slate. Matt Olson, lefty. He hits lefties well. Austin Gomber also not lights out against left-handed hitters. And it is something that I do believe in because he does have a changeup that he relies on pretty heavily against righties that he doesn't throw to lefties. 17% K percentage against lefties this year, 228 expected ISO. And like I said, Matt Olson can handle left-handed pitching. So I do like getting to him. The field's there, at 15%. I'm at 12. So same ballpark. But if you are going to the Braves or even just need a one-off at first base, I do think Olson is a good one. 231 expected ISO in 349 plate appearances against left-handed pitching since the start of last season. This is not somebody that you need to shy away from just because Gomber throws left-handed. Chaparro, I mentioned with the Nat stack, 2,900, not getting much ownership. Facing Falter, who does give up some power. He's cheap, probably a pretty useful piece if you're going to like Suarez plus Lopez lineups, or if you're stacking an expensive offense with Lopez or Suarez or something like that. Nathaniel Lowe, pretty good spot. He's batting fifth. He's 3,400. I'm right around the field. He's 10, 11% owned. Good park for home runs, facing a pitcher that doesn't miss bats in Kahanowitz. Really like getting to whatever Texas I can against him. Yepez, another value bat here. I'm pretty much in line with the field. Field's projected to be getting to Andy Ibanez quite a bit more than me. I don't know what the deal with his ownership is or why he's getting so much of it, other than, it is a 5-game slate, but he is batting second. He's 2,600. He is the type of play where if this ownership holds as we get closer to lock, I am okay with just not playing a $2,600 guy on a team that has like a 4 implied run total. It's, again, not that the matchup against Perez is bad or anything. It's just that Ibanez isn't a real power threat. He's not the type of guy that's likely to put up a raw score that you have difficulty matching. And it's one thing if he's like 5% owned, then you can just use him as a value play that opens up stuff elsewhere in your lineup. That's great. But if he's going to be, 15% owned, give or take, the benefits kind of just aren't really there when most likely his good game is still, like 14 points or something that you can replicate pretty easily with other guys. So he's somebody I'm not getting to right now. Cody Clemens, kind of pretty much the same thing. Good matchup against Aller, but he's batting 8th. He's 3,100. He's getting 12% ownership. I'm not really getting to him at first base, maybe getting a little bit more at second, but I'm not really getting him at second either. It's just, we see it on pretty much every show that I do. I would just rather play, if I have to play cheap value that isn't very good at hitting, I would just rather be going to ones that aren't 10 to 15% owned because, the range of outcomes isn't really that scary to get away from. Einsteinium said favorite position to pivot to a lower owned bat. So far, looked like first base. Obviously, I haven't gone through the rest, and we'll see. But first base, Torkelson was my highest owned guy, and he was only like 8% owned. Catcher, my 2 highest owned guys were Real Muto and Murphy, who were the 2 highest owned catchers. Actually, never mind. I guess it's here. Brandon Drury, 27% of my lineups, only projected for 6% ownership. He's not a great hitter, but he's 2,600. He does have the platoon advantage for whatever that's worth. Keep in mind, I did just tell you that Cody Bradford has a much higher strikeout percentage against righties and has given up less power to them, but he has the theoretical platoon advantage at least. But mostly it's just that you get the negative correlation, decent spot in the order. If he's actually going to be 1/3 the ownership of Andy Ibanez, that is just insane. They have the same range of outcomes. Very similar implied run totals for their respective teams. At best, Ibanez is in a good home run park, and so is Drury. If you just want to solely buy into this year's home run numbers at Petco, more likely Ibanez is in like a neutral home run park, and Drury's in a good home run park. So, this is a spot where I think they should probably. I'm basically playing them a combined like 25 to 30% of the time. So I kind of think that price range is useful and probably should be like 25 to 30% owned. But if the field is just going to choose one of them and play them at a clip that's 3-1, the other one, I'm just going to jam the one that the field isn't playing. And that's exactly how I want things to work out, especially in large field, top heavy tournaments. Bryson Stott showing up for me, 18% ownership. I'm pretty much in line with the field. Pretty self-explanatory, 3,800. in the middle of a lineup that has a very high implied run total, good matchup, all of that. Angel Reese, Jake. Marcus Semien, in line with the field on him as well. Good matchup, good park, back in the lineup, 4,900. Looks pretty good. Gonzalez, batting cleanup, 3,600. A little below the field, but good value spot. He is right-handed going up against Irvin, which isn't ideal. Irvin, like I was saying earlier, has been much better against right-handed hitters, but still batting cleanup. And, especially if you're using him in stacks, makes a lot of sense. Righties against Irvin this year have still been, didn't load correctly. 152 expected ISO, 22% strikeout percentage against righties. That's what I thought. And I was really confused when my screen said something else. But he, still hitting the middle of the order, good price tag and all of that. So especially if you're stacking Pittsburgh, you can go to him. Vargas, cheap, second base and third base eligible. I am getting to him a little bit more than somebody like Ibanez. Similar ownership, but I think not even necessarily a better matchup. Maybe just getting to the Nats, probably just because I'm getting to the Nats a little bit more than the Tigers, or I don't really know why Vargas is showing up more than Ibanez, but I think he's a pretty similar play to Ibanez. Bogarts, Ibanez showing up a little bit more for me at second base also. So that's actually probably what it is that Ibanez is first base and second base, and I just don't really need or want Ibanez at first base. Whereas at second base, it is a weaker position. So I'm getting to him more there, and then I'm getting to Vargas more there. So I think that's actually the difference in Ibanez versus Vargas for me. For the field, Semien and Stott, getting to both of them. Again, below the field on Ibanez. We've kind of talked several times about why. I'm assuming even with the field on Vargas, once I click over to third base, even with the field on Gonzalez, not really getting to Cody Clemens much, a little below the field on Bogarts, way over the field on Drury. Field's not really getting to much of anybody else at second base. I don't think that question's even close either, Jake. Didn't have to think about that one for a second. Josh Young, 16% for me, 14% for the field. Good power, good price, good park, good matchup. Everything looks good for him. Same goes for Josh Smith, third base and shortstop eligible. So he's a little bit more popular, and I assume I'm going to have some at shortstop as well. But they both look like very good plays to me. Happy to get to Manny Machado at 12, 13% ownership. Again, not the best power matchup against Casey Mize, but you do have a pitcher in Mize that's going to let you put the ball in play. And Manny Machado, we know, can do a lot of damage when he does put the ball in play. Jose Tana, another cheap bat in the Nats lineup that can open some other stuff up for you, even if he's not the most exciting play. And then kind of just mixing and matching everybody else. The field is getting to Kiner Falefa a lot. 15% projected ownership. I'm about half of that at third base. Maybe have some at shortstop as well. He is leading off. He is right-handed, so you don't have the platoon advantage, but pretty cheap price tag. If you're going with a lineup that has, Reynolds and Cruz and Tellez, may as well mix in Kiner Falefa and Gonzalez, or at least one of the two, get some savings and be able to afford good pitching, one-offs, whatever. Everything else, pretty straightforward, I think. Nothing that really looks too interesting. Gio Urshela, not showing up a lot for me. Again, batting eighth, 2,800. Decent point per dollar play, but 12% ownership is enough to kind of just drive me away from it. Zach Neto, I think, is my highest owned hitter on the entire slate right now. 4,400, only getting 6% ownership. Okay, so this is one spot where it's starting to concern me a little bit, and I might, after having done this show, bump my ownership projections on the Angels at least a little bit, just to try and account for the percentage of the field that does use Sims now, because the fact that the Angels are coming in this aggressively for me makes me think that people with similar processes to me are probably going to be doing the same thing, especially because I think it's a very straightforward, easy spot to explain, the way that I was when I was talking about how both sides of this matchup have a really high ceiling. So I still, would expect to be getting to the Angels, but I might end up, bumping Neto from like 6% to 10% or something. And the same for the rest of these Angels, just to try and do a little bit better job of accounting for the bump that they'll get if everyone's sim model and sim program is just telling them this is the spot to go to. But one way or the other, high upside spot for Neto, all of that. I've said 100 times already, but like the park, Neto, does give you some power and stolen base upside as well. Bradford, I do not have stolen base data on, not a big enough sample for him. But Neto gives you upside. Obviously, Trey Turner gives you upside as well. And then it drops off for me to Arcia, getting more Josh Smith. So that puts me a little bit over the field in the aggregate on Smith. O'Neal Cruz, I have 8% at shortstop, probably have some more in the outfield. He's expensive, but does have MPE, does have stolen base upside, does have some power upside in that park. Jake Irvin has been slightly above average at controlling the running game. Nothing too concerning, but definitely not somebody that you're looking at and saying, oh, if Cruz gets on, he's definitely going to go. Also not somebody that you're saying, there's no possible chance he goes. Still, a pretty good spot for him, but you are paying for it. Connor Falefa showing up a little bit more for me, 4%. So that puts me a little below the field, but pretty close combined between third base and shortstop. The field is getting to Trey Turner the most, followed by Cruz, Smith, Arcia. So I'm kind of in line with the field, with the exception of Neto. But how much Neto I'm getting to is pulling me at least a little below the field on all of Turner, Cruz, Arcia. So mostly agree with them, just not getting quite as much. But you can see the field pretty strongly on 5 shortstops here: Turner, Cruz, Smith, Arcia, Connor Falefa, and then everything drops off. If Neto ends up coming in higher than projected, like I'm expecting, you probably just see the ownership come down a little bit on like Connor Falefa at a similar price point would be my guess. And then finally, wrapping things up in the outfield, Joe Adell, 27% for me, 5% for the field. Kevin Pillar, 23% for me, 3% for the field. These, again, are just examples of I want to bump the Angels ownership a little bit because this is this is the biggest flaw with using contest sims, basically, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier about how whatever product you're using, whether it's an optimizer, sims, whatever, it's just purely doing what you tell it to do with the inputs that you give it. It can only be as good as the information that you're giving it. And so if the information that I gave it in the build that I did for this show is that only 5% of the field is going to play Joe Adell and 3% is going to play Kevin Pillar, it's going to tell me that I just win a ton of money by playing those guys. When even if Joe Adell is 8% or 9% and Kevin Pillar is 7%, I can still make money playing them. Like, they're probably still good plays, but they're going to be much less profitable than if those guys are actually 3 and 4%. And so you would just see this come down to where, let's say Joe Adell is 8%. Maybe I'm playing like 16 instead of 27. And so I'm still over the field because it is still a good play. It does still have negative correlation. It has all of the stuff I've talked about. But when you're seeing a gap this big, it's because the sim is basically saying no other spot on this slate is close to as profitable as playing the Angels, when that's probably not true because, unfortunately, I'm not playing against a bunch of other people that don't have the same information that I do. So that's why I'm going to end up probably bumping the Angels up, and it is something I'd be a little bit, concerned about. But at the same time, I do agree with all of the reasons why the Angels would be showing up. It's very easy for me to explain. I do think they're good plays, probably just a little bit less good than they're showing right now. Adolis Garcia, I like a lot. Taylor Ward, same stuff, but he is at least a good hitter and at the top of that order. Michael Harris, if you can get to him, great. Again, don't avoid the lefty-lefty matchup here. He's leading off. Gomber isn't good against lefties. 4K is a very good price tag leading off for a team with a 5.5 implied run total. He gives you stolen base upside. He gives you power upside. So definitely, again, not somebody that I would be looking to avoid. Also, Austin Gomber is not good at preventing stolen bases. If you're wondering throughout the rest of the slate, neither is Casey Mize. Neither is Reynaldo Lopez. So I guess if you're going to the Rockies, find some fast guys. But Casey Mize, Austin Gomber, neither one are very good at it. Falter below average. Perez and Suarez are both excellent at it. So if you're trying to target stolen bases outside of the Rockies, I think it's looking at the Padres and looking at Atlanta. Atlanta in particular, I think that being really useful since they look like one of the best teams on the slate anyway. Castellanos, Schwarber, Philly, good spot. Not getting to them as much as the field, but still getting to them, a pretty decent amount. I like Langford here. I really like Dylan Cruz. 9-10% ownership leading off, showing up 13% for me. Gives you power upside, gives you stolen base upside. Falter has not been great at holding runners either. I don't remember if I mentioned him 30 seconds ago or not. He hasn't been as bad as Mize and Gomber, but he's been below average, if I didn't already say that. So it does look good for Dylan Cruz. The field is getting to Schwarber, Soler, who obviously looks good. I'm just a bit below. Same for Ozuna. Laureano, I'm like half the field. So it looks like I'm getting to Atlanta just, like half to 80% of like what the field is, which maybe that changes a little bit once I adjust Angels ownership to come in closer to where I think it's going to. But doesn't really surprise me. Like Atlanta is a team that is clearly one of the most likely to succeed. They are also popular, and it is also difficult on a 5-game slate to really differentiate, especially when you're jamming in the popular pitching like I am. So I'm not really surprised to see Atlanta showing up for me, but just not at the same rates as the field, because so many lineups that I would be making are just not going to get through the cut for me and be entered into tournaments, because it's 5 popular Atlanta guys plus Lopez plus another popular pitcher. And at that point, it's just really hard to win tournaments. So that's kind of why that shakes out like that for Atlanta, and in general for popular teams for me. Fernando Tatis, I'm a little below the field, but happy to get to him. Definitely somebody that would benefit if he can get on base against Casey Mize. Should be able to run there. So pretty interesting slate, I think. Seems like Angels will be pretty heavy for me, even if or when I adjust their projected ownership. That could also, I think I saw somebody mention it in chat at some point, but that could also kind of drive up a team like the Nats for me, maybe, where I'm already getting to the Nats like pretty close to the field, and I'm jamming the Angels at, half the ownership of the Nats. If I adjust it so the Angels and Nats are much closer in ownership, it could just create a situation where I'm getting over the field on both of those teams, and I would be perfectly fine with that as well if it works out that way. So if anybody has any last second questions, get them in. But otherwise, that's all I have for this show. Thanks for checking it out. Good luck on your showdown lineups tonight. Don't forget to sign up for Endgame and or my, well, not and, because there's no reason to do both. Endgame or my NFL Dub Club in the description below. Links are in there. Otherwise, I think I will be back tomorrow at the same time. That's not 100%. I do have some family stuff, but I think I'll be back. I'll tweet one way or the other during the day. Hopefully see you tomorrow. Good luck on your lineups tonight, and thanks for checking out the show.